In this lecture, I'll discuss the value of life and 5 different readings. Taken together, the readings provide a number of interesting points of departure in considering the value of life. First, what can anthropology contribute to the study of life, ethics concerning life in the field of bioethics as a whole? Again, remember from earlier, as Singer and Baer maintain in their 2012 text, anthropologists are often left out of discussions, bioethical discussions, at the peril of issues, very important issues for diverse populations that bioethicists serve. What does it mean to consider the value of life? And what exactly is the value of life? How is life understood? Consider, for example, your own life and how this is interrelated with life that is other and potentially not other, both in terms of other human beings and other organisms, for example, the microbiota in your body right now. Who can assign a value to life? So here we're getting to fundamental issues of power and questions about biopolitics. And as one of the texts suggests, is moving even beyond biopolitics to consider other aspects and other realms. In what ways did the articles demonstrate the importance of culture in demonstrating, for example, the beginnings and ends of life? How, as a focus on life, challenged various aspects of anthropology and the study of anthropology as a whole. So the articles that we'll be considering for this week, Davis's What is Life? What is Life Worth? A Rough Guide to Valuation, Locke's Death in Technological Time, Locating the End of Meaningful Life, Marsland and Prince, looking at this is a review piece that highlights a particular section of Medical Anthropology Quarterly. Monerism, Living Cadavers in Bangladesh, Bioviolence in the Human Organ Bazaar, and Svensson's work on selective reproduction, social and temporal imaginaries for negotiating the value of life in human and animal neonates. So we're just going to go through these articles in alphabetical order. And again, what you should be looking for would be the key themes and ideas that would emerge over the course of the articles that we'll be discussing in class as well. So Davis's 2012 piece, What is Life Worth? A Rough Guide to Valuation, situates anthropological study and examines anthropological study in the context of questions about valuation in the context of life. He notes that there is an increasing concern in anthropology for addressing social inequalities. In this, he addresses, or he follows off of the work of Farmer and Shepard Hughes, which has led to corresponding overall decline in our interest in celebrating diverse logics for their own sakes. And so what Davis is getting at here is a focus on the dystopic and how this has ramifications within anthropology. This approach seems also to mean commitment to a single underlying logic, a single overall worldview. Dystopic worldview. It is as though we have integrated other people without equally integrating other ways of thinking. What I would like to do is find a way to get us back to an appreciation of our responsibility for utopic possibilities. It's a really interesting statement that anthropologists have this responsibility to present utopic possibilities or possibilities which exist outside of dystopic futures or contemporary imagination. Anthropology, for Davis, is offering a qualitative answer to a quantitative question, and this is the answer that Davis takes in this essay. So you have what is life worth, a fundamentally quantitative type of question. Can you put a number on that? Can you be specific about what that is? And rather than going towards that or working towards that end, Davis gears the entire essay towards a more qualitative approach. And as we'll go through, it'll become evident what exactly Davis is getting at here. So he discusses death in life and life itself as interested, and how this allows for three distinct possibilities. That first, it makes human life continuous with other life. The value of life is not at the level solely of the individual organism, but also of opportunistic others that are interested in life, not necessarily in the preservation of a particular form of life. Davis also notes that life is seen as continuous with non-life that exists or can exist within it, and he discusses molecules in particular here. And he also notes that all forms of life have a capacity for responsiveness. The figure to the diagram, the drawing here to the right, is from Sterlach, who Davis talks about his work. He's an Australian artist who does a number of different body projects overall. And I think this, what Davis is getting at here, and why he's drawing from Sterlach's work, is Sterlach maintains the body is obsolete, that it comes to be replaced by technologies that can be continually maintained, whereas the post-obsolete body requires investment, and a fair amount of investment in terms of the donors and the funding for Sterlach's own work and his exhibitions, and where he engages in the display as well. And this itself, in Sterlach's own utopic vision, this is not made possible by the opportunistic growth of life in a non-orderly fashion that goes against the artist's initial intention of the exhibition. You can see a link here. I'd encourage you to go ahead and follow that up and take a look at some of Sterlach's work. So for Davis, death is the way in which the social order will move itself through time. There's a constant awareness of death that underpins the moral community as mediated by both therapeutic and divinatory practices. So this is, I think, a rather interesting statement here, the idea of the maintenance of health, to be free from disease and illness. At the ultimate end would be the continuance of a particular life form, and if not, death is, and the practices associated with it, are a way to move the individual. What Davis also touches on here is the concept of life unworthy of life. This is Angevins' work, and we'll touch on this. A number of the other readings for this week also touch on his work. It looks at life unworthy of life, in the face of which death can be a sort of deliverance. And we talked about this also in the context of different narratives, illness narratives, that people talk about disease as a potential deliverance even to a higher level. Davis considers the ethical and moral parameters within which quantification takes place or makes sense, because these parameters will condition what is too much morality or too little vitality. And he notes also that lethal behavior is needed for the continuance of life. But within this, within our need for lethality, there is reflection as well as empathy. And when public, he gives the example here of public executions. When they cease to perform their particular edifying function for the community, public executions were essentially brought away from the public gaze. They were initially looked at as protecting society and defense of society. And this is the point that Davis makes with lethality as a whole, that is always in defense of something. He also brings up some interesting cases of assisted suicide, and when in fact, and how in fact individuals, how this enters the moral, legal frame in a variety of different contexts as well. And so there are multiple strands that go through Davis's argument, and it's rather complex. And as you might imagine, he comes to what he refers to as an in-conclusion on page 513. I'm going to go ahead and read through it here because it highlights some of the key aspects that he touches on over the course of his essay. As ethnographers and ethnologists in the anthropology of medicine, we are always laboring under the confines of morality. Here, on the ground, in the field, and by a comparative method that gives attention to local complexities, we are precisely where the praises of Foucault and the hopes of Lévi-Strauss would have us be. If we expand the language of the therapeutics so that the core of our thinking is toward the remedy, which can only sometimes be the medicine, if we expand the concept to include not just the medical, but also the legal and the political, we will find that we are better placed than most to understand the power of the single instance to change the world. I write an in conclusion because I suppose that's what I'm saying, is that our utopia is always in the working toward it, in the labor of love that we call a field science and its comparison, a documentary art. And so here, again, Davis is concluding by mentioning and bringing out the utopic possibilities of ethnographic field work and its writing into various ethnographies. Locke's 1996, Death and Technological Time, Locating the End of Meaningful Life, theoretically draws from Bruno Latour's We Have Never Been Modern 1993 piece to highlight the nature dichotomy, where nature is seen as a domain entirely independent of the moral order. In practice, however, nature continues to serve, as it did prior to the Enlightenment, as a mere touchstone, the effects of which are especially evident when we grapple with assigning status of life to various. Locke also draws from Lamb's work in 1985 that notes that having a life in the biological sense and being alive in the social and moral sense are actually distinct things. Notes the importance of culture in medical, legal, and ethical deliberations over the end of life. So what Locke is specifically looking at here is when death actually occurs in the United States of America and Japan. And in the United States, Descartes' mind-body dualism pervades the overall logic there, and the loss of personhood is associated with a loss of the mind, separate from the body. There's sparse media consideration in the context of the United States along the lines of the medical deliberations that have taken place over the disagreements over what actually constitutes the end of life amongst medical doctors. Hence, more of a unified front is presented to the public as a whole. This led to a general acceptance of the scientific death in the context of the brain dead, highlighting the difference between a neurological and organic whole and a collection of organs to be harvested. The focus here in the United States is on the heroics of organ donation or the gift of life. And in the constant quest for viable organs, there was a need to harvest these as soon as possible. And the recipient must be forefront in the mind of the doctor. And so this is coming from the American Medical Association, a lot of these different discussions of doctors, the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And if you have essentially a person that is no longer a person because they are brain dead, they are merely a collection of organs, the highest good would be to harvest those organs, to get those organs and utilize them for recipients. Many in Locke cites some figures here of, and again, this is a dated piece from 1996, the number of people that are dying while they're waiting for organ transplant. So this is becoming part of this overall heroic narrative of harvesting these needed resources to save people. Confirming brain death is ultimately left to the discretion of clinicians whose practice varies quite widely. And this is something that we've already talked about a little bit in this class in terms of the actual practice and compliance, not only of patients, but of doctors to evidence-based standards as a whole that Singer and Baer touched on earlier. In Japan, on the other hand, brain death is not legally accepted as death. Death by most, including clinicians, is seen as a social event. Media accounts question whether death can be understood as clearly diagnosable event at all. And those that are going overseas for organ transplants are seen as selfish. And certainly we see this in the context of the organ bazaar that we're going to talk about in one of the articles for this week. And there's a reluctance to locate death entirely in the world of technoscience, even for these clinicians and medical doctors as a whole. And a lot of this has to do with the history and culture of Japan.